The whole concept of color spaces, color gamuts, printing profiles, paper profiles is really a minefield for a lot of photographers. I think most of us, including myself, really just want to have a flow in place that if I have an image on screen, when I press print, the print that comes out my printer is representative of what I see. And to a large extent, I've been very happy with my print flow or my reproduction flow to date in terms of my color reproduction. And the reason being is I primarily shoot people, so I'm never dealing with very highly saturated colors. So most of the colors I'm dealing with fit pretty comfortably within most of the known color spaces, which would be sRGB and Adobe RGB. But let's go through it very simply. I have here my monitor set up, and the space I work in is Adobe RGB. So if I come along to color settings, I can see here at the very top my working space is Adobe RGB. When I convert any of my images from RAW, when I choose the color space, I always bring them in and I save them as Adobe RGB. Let's just look at a recent image that I've taken. And this image is just a very simple portrait of UK model Holly or Ivory Flame. If we look at what profile it's in, we can see that the profile this is in at the moment is Adobe RGB. So this is in the same profile stored in that image as it is on screen. Now this is still no guarantee that what I print will actually represent this. So what I want to make sure of is that this image on screen will be the same when I go to print. So my print flow is very much like this. I go to File, Print. I'm using the Epson 3800 large format printer. So one of the things I do most importantly is in the color handling over here. There's two options here really. It's Printer Manages Color or Photoshop Manages Color, and I use Photoshop to manage my colors. And when you do this, it does come up with a little warning saying remember to disable color management in the dialog box. So I'm telling my printer that, you know what, Photoshop is actually going to manage my color. The next thing I need to do is I need to give it a printer profile. Now this is a little bit complicated because actually what you're giving this here is not just a printer profile, you're also giving it a paper profile. So my printer is the Epson 3800 and the paper I'm going to shoot this on or print this on is Epson Premium Luster. So the profile is a Pro 38 PL PP. Now, you get these profiles from each of your printer's websites. If you're going to a HP printer, you go to the HP website. If you're Canon, you can go to the Canon website. And ideally, when you install it, it should actually install these profiles for you. The next thing you do is your rendering intent. Rendering is basically if your screen has a blue and it's trying to print that blue to paper. If the paper and the printer cannot actually get that exact same blue, it has to somehow map the screen blue to the paper and printer blue. And that rendering is done in different ways. The one I use typically is perceptual, and perceptual is meant to mimic the human eye. So it's meant to give you something that you believe is suitable for human eye. There are other ones like relative colorimetric, absolute colorimetric, and so on, but I use perceptual. The black point compensation has no effect whatsoever if you're on perceptual. It only really kicks in if you're using relative colorimetric or absolute colorimetric. So whether you leave it on or not makes no difference. The next thing I do is I actually go into my printer, and this is very important. So in my printer, really what I choose is I choose my media type. So in this case, I'm using Premium Luster paper. As per my profile, I'm telling it to print in color. My print quality, I will always go to quality rather than speed, but the most important one is this dialog box. It's the no color adjustment. After that, really, it's just a case of what size I want to print, and from there, I'm ready to go. Now, what's interesting is if you have Photoshop manages colors, down here you can have match print colors, and you can click on this box. And really what this box does is it will try and give you a proof. It will try and show you what your print will look like versus your screen will look like. And I'm clicking on this, there's very little or no shift whatsoever. Another one which is very interesting to look at is the gamut warning. And a gamut warning is basically any colors that are on screen that cannot be printed. And to date, really my gamut warning, if I click on it, I don't get any warnings either. So really when I do this, I'm just ready and I can click print and away it goes. And that's really what's happened to date for me. However, recently I've been asked to print some landscape images for a photographer from my camera club. And landscape images are typically much more highly saturated than you would get of portraits. And one of the issues I was seeing is my prints were coming out completely differently to my on-screen image, which really forced me to look into this. And this is the flow that I've really come up with for it. It's not a new flow. I'm sure the information is out there. So I'm just going to have a look at the landscape image. So this is not my image. The original photographer is Deirdre Doherty, and you can see really in this image it's a very highly saturated image with a lot of magenta and a lot of blue. The space that this is in as well, just have a look at it. If we look at, not color settings, but edit, convert to profile, the space this is in as well is Adobe RGB. So I expected to be able to just go along and print this. However, if we do that, let's just go along to my same settings as previously. If I print it, what's interesting is if I click match print colors, I can see a noticeable shift in this area here and a noticeable shift in this area here. But more importantly, if I click gamut warning, the whole screen fills with gray, or virtually the whole screen fills with gray. So this doesn't mean that it will print gray. What this means is anywhere you have gray in this image, you're going to ask the Photoshop and the printer to somehow determine the nearest color that it can print to what you have on screen. But there will be a difference. And the issue I was getting is that this difference is not apparent until you get the print. So when I was tweaking the colors in Photoshop in order to get a print, I was never getting the right results that I was expecting. So it wasn't working for me. Really, I needed to come up with a method of being able to edit the image here on screen and knowing from screen what I'm going to get when I go to print. And this is very new to me, but one of the options we have is what's called a proof setup. So if I go up to the view menu, proof setup, go into custom. And at this point, what I can do now is I can choose my device to simulate. And the device to simulate is your printer and paper combination. So I'm using the Pro 38 PLPP, so in other words, the Epson 3800 with premium luster paper. Preserve RGB numbers should be left off, and again I'm going the rendering intent is left perceptual. My black point doesn't make any difference. So now I click OK. Let's just zoom in just a little bit. If I go to View, Proof Colors, when I have colors set, so Control Y, let's just do it here. This is proofing the colors and this is not proofing the colors, and we can definitely see there's a notable shift. What's very interesting is here I'm getting a very deep, horrible is probably harsh, but a very deep, very unnatural blue, where when I look at the screen version it's not so bad. So the proof colors is giving me some idea of what I'm seeing, and this is very useful to me. But what was very useful to me as well is if I can do View Gamut Warning, and I can see the colors that are out of gamut. Now, the only way of bringing colors back into gamut is you need to desaturate those colors. In particular here, I need to desaturate, if we look at the histogram, I need to desaturate blue, because blue primarily is the colors that we're getting. Now, we can only do this, let's take a look at this. If I go to View Saturation, one of the things I can do is I can choose Master. If I desaturate Master, it will desaturate all colors the same amount. And let's just bring it down and desaturate it until such a point as the gray gamut warning disappears. Let's just take a look around the screen just to make sure there's no gamuts. Yeah, so I need to desaturate here by about -45. And now, if I go to View Gamut Warning, we can see there is no difference. View Gamut Warning, Control Shift Y. There's no difference. So if I go to File, Print, now if I match print colors, there's very little shift, and if I do my gamut warning, there's nothing out of gamut. So now my print will give me exactly what I see on screen.